Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're in the heart of Tokyo, 1945, a city of narrow streets, wooden homes and paper screens, now cloaked in smoke and the soft glow of distant flames. You're not a soldier or an official, just an ordinary civilian moving through a city in quiet upheaval. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair, plus other sleep tools, in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You do not remember the moment evening actually begins. It slips in quietly, like someone who has lived in the house long enough not to need to knock. One moment, the light over Tokyo is warm and golden, and the next it softens into something more fragile, something that seems unsure how long it is welcome to stay. You step outside your small wooden house, sliding the thin shoji door closed behind you, and breathe in the faint warmth rising from the street. Smells of dust, tatami mats, and the last idle movements of neighbours returning home. Nothing about the moment seems remarkable, yet you feel a kind of tenderness in it, as though the night has paused in front of you, waiting for you to acknowledge it. You walk slowly down the narrow lane, not because you have anywhere to be, but because the pace feels correct for this hour. The boards of the houses on either side glow faintly. Softened by the dusk, lanterns blink to life one by one, each offering a small, trembling patch of light. You pass a window where a woman is folding laundry, each motion deliberate, almost ceremonial. She hums a tune that has no urgency to it. Somewhere farther down the street, an old bicycle creaks, its rusted chain rattling briefly before settling back into silence. You pause a moment to adjust your sandals, though they've not come loose. Sometimes you create small excuses to linger. The air is pleasant, almost too gentle for a winter month. It has that faint sweetness of a city not yet asleep, where warm broth is still being ladled into bowls, and radios whisper news that no one listens to closely. You are aware, if only distantly, that the world is changing outside these narrow streets. Everyone knows it, but the knowledge sits somewhere behind the ribs rather than in the mind. Tonight, though, that distant weight seems muffled, softened beneath the quiet textures of daily life. You move on, letting your hand drift along the wooden wall beside you. The grain feels dry under your fingertips. Familiar enough that you don't need to look, small details hold you. The worn threshold of a neighbour's doorway, a stray cat weaving through a row of crates, the smell of steamed rice lingering from an open window. You find yourself watching the cat for a moment, as it pauses to lick its paw beneath the lantern's glow. The world feels made of small, delicate things, each existing only as long as you notice them. A child runs down the lane chasing a paper ball. His footsteps slap lightly against the ground. When he sees you, he slows, bows politely, then continues on with the loose, carefree gait of someone who has never had to imagine danger. His mother calls after him, her voice warm but weary. It's the kind of sound that dissolves into the air almost immediately. You stand still for a moment, watching their door slide shut, leaving the street in a soft, unbroken quiet. A cart rolls by, pushed by an older man with a back bent from years of work. He carries bundles of firewood, each tied with rough rope. You offer a gentle nod as he passes, and he returns it without breaking his slow, steady rhythm. The lantern above his cart sways slightly, casting shadows that stretch and fold with each step. You notice how the cart's wheels leave faint grooves in the dust, lines that will be gone by morning. Your stomach reminds you that you have not eaten since midday, so you turn toward a small food stall near the end of the lane. The owner is ladling miso soup into a bowl for a waiting customer. The steam rises in soft, ghost-like swirls, catching the faint light of the lantern. When it is your turn, he greets you with a tired smile and asks if you'll have the usual. You nod. There's comfort in the small consistency of the question. He hands you the bowl with both hands, as though the gesture is as important as the meal itself. You sit on a wooden bench beside the stool, feeling the warmth of the bowl seep into your palms. The miso is simple, not remarkable, but its heat settles gently into your chest. From where you sit, you can hear the faint murmur of the Sumida River in the distance, a sound that has always seemed to cradle the city. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth and the soft sounds around you form a gentle haze. When you open them again, the world looks slightly different, not changed, just softened by the calm that settles in your limbs. People pass by in slow, steady rhythms. A man in work clothes heading home, his face smudged with soot. Two young women walking arm in arm, speaking softly about something that makes them smile. An elderly woman carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth, moving with the determination of someone who has made this walk for decades. Each figure blends into the soft tapestry of the evening, a familiar procession that holds the comfort of repetition. Once you finish your soup, you place the empty bowl back on the counter, bowing slightly in thanks. The stall owner returns the gesture with a small wave. You walk away, listening to the soft clinks of his ladle and bowls behind you. They fade into the distance like a lullaby, too shy to linger. You turn toward the main street, where lights are brighter but still gentle. Even here, where rickshaws pass and merchants call in low voices, the night feels slow, not rushed. The shops are winding down, fabric banners sway in the faint breeze, brushing lightly against wooden frames. A radio inside one shop plays a song you recall from childhood. The melody is simple, a little melancholy, as though remembering something it cannot name. As you continue walking, you notice the sky overhead has deepened into that particular shade of blue that comes just before full darkness. A few stars attempt to pierce through, though they struggle against the glow of lanterns and street lamps. The air carries a chill now, threading through the warmth that still clings to the ground. You pull your coat a little tighter around your shoulders and continue on, unhurried. You pass a row of wooden houses where families are preparing for sleep. The low murmur of conversations drifts through the walls, fragments of sentences about rice, about work, about a child who refuses to settle down. A baby cries somewhere, but the sound is soft, as though even the child is reluctant to disturb the night. You walk past these voices with the quiet reverence of someone passing through holy ground. Ordinary life, in its smallness, has a way of feeling sacred when the world beyond it grows uncertain. Your feet take you toward the small, open square where neighbours gather on warmer nights. Tonight, only a few people linger. An elderly man sharpens a knife slowly, letting sparks catch briefly in the air before fading. A woman sits on a low stool, knitting with steady hands. A group of teenagers shares a bag of roasted chestnuts, their laughter hushed but genuine. You stand at the edge of the square, watching them, feeling the gentle pulse of life moving through the scene. There is nothing remarkable happening, and yet you feel an ache behind the stillness, as if some part of you already understands how fragile these moments are. You walk home at the same slow pace, allowing the quiet to settle into you. The lanterns flicker as you pass, their flames bending slightly in the cool air. When you reach your street again, the child with the paper ball is nowhere to be seen. His family's house is dark except for a faint glow in the back room. You imagine them settling in, wrapping themselves in blankets, unaware how precious such routines will later feel. Your own house greets you with its familiar creak as you slide open the door. Inside, the shadows are soft, unthreatening. You light a small lamp, its glow settling over the tatami mats in a gentle wash of gold. You sit for a moment, simply listening to the quiet. There is a comfort in the soundlessness, a reassurance that feels almost physical. You prepare for bed without hurry, folding your clothes neatly, placing them where you will find them in the morning. You lie down, the mat beneath you cool but welcoming. Through the thin walls, you hear the faint rustle of the wind, the distant chime of someone closing a gate, the soft footsteps of a neighbour settling in for the night. Each sound feels like part of a lullaby, designed only for this moment. As your eyes grow heavy, you sense the familiar safety of a city wrapped in darkness and quiet. You breathe deeply, feeling the faint warmth of the day still lingering in the air. Nothing feels urgent, nothing feels threatened. You let your thoughts drift as lightly as dust settling on a quiet street. Sleep begins to gather around you, soft as the folds of a worn kimono, and you drift into it, unaware that this gentle night, the small rhythms, the warm lanterns, the quiet breath of the wooden houses, is already becoming a memory. Morning arrives in the way it often does in Tokyo, by quietly replacing one shade of grey with another. You wake without urgency, noticing the faint coolness that has gathered in the room overnight. The lamp you left on has burned itself out, leaving only a thin thread of smoke drifting toward the ceiling. You lie there for a moment, listening to the subtle shifting of the wooden house as it settles into the day. There is a stillness to the hour that feels both comforting and strangely hollow. When you rise, the tatami mats press gently against your feet, their familiar texture grounding you in the present. You slide open the shoji screen, letting in a wash of pale light. The paper panel glows softly beneath your fingertips, thin enough that you can see your shadow ripple across its surface. It is through these small things that the fragility of the world begins to reveal itself. The way the paper allows light to slip through, the way the wood creaks with every shift in weather, the way the air feels almost too light to hold on to. Outside, the lane is quiet. A woman sweeps her doorway, the bristles of her broom barely whispering against the ground. The soft strokes blend with the distant murmur of a train passing, somewhere beyond the cramped rooftops. You step outside and begin walking, drawn by no decision you can name. The neighbourhood feels familiar in the comforting way of old habits. Narrow paths, wooden fences, the faint smell of charcoal from someone's morning fire. But today the details seem to linger a little longer in your awareness, as if they are waiting to be memorised. The houses around you lean closely together, their walls made of thin planks that shift with the wind. Many have paper windows patched with scraps from old calendars or envelopes. Sunlight presses against them like a tentative hand, creating pale rectangles of brightness that pulse gently with the movements outside. As you walk past one home, a shadow flickers behind its paper screen, a hand reaching for a kettle, the silhouette of someone smoothing their hair. Lives unfold behind delicate barriers, visible only in faint outlines. You pass a narrow alley where lines of laundry hang low, swaying slightly. Shirts, towels, and worn cotton yukata catch the morning light, each one a small flag of domestic life. A stray breeze carries their scent, a mixture of soap and damp fabric, soft and familiar. Beneath the laundry lines, a cat stretches along a wooden railing, its movements slow and deliberate, as though it trusts the world not to rush it. The more you walk, the more the city's nature becomes clear. It is a place assembled from things that burn easily. Paper walls, thin wood, bamboo frames, even the roofs patched with shingles and tar paper seem less like shields and more like suggestions of protection. You have always known this, the way one knows that a house built from dry branches will crackle quickly in flame. Yet knowing has never felt quite like this, never so sharp, never so close. You turn onto a wider street where early vendors have just begun to set up their stalls. A man arranging small boxes of matches nods politely as you pass. His hands move quickly, aligning the boxes with the precision of someone who has spent his life working with fire, yet has learned to treat it with obedience rather than fear. Farther down, a woman unties bundles of dried fish, the faint salt hitting the air in thin waves. She greets you softly, her face weary but kind. The street is lined with shops, whose walls are so thin you can hear muffled conversations through them, voices rising and falling like waves behind paper-thin tides. A radio plays somewhere, the music wavering slightly, as if travelling through layers of cloth instead of air. You pause in front of a small stationery shop, where rows of paper sheets hang from bamboo rods. They sway like pale leaves in the faint morning breeze, some smooth, some textured with fibres that look like tiny threads of cloud. The shopkeeper steps outside to adjust a display, and he smiles when he notices your gaze lingering. He gestures to the paper gently, as though it deserves respect simply for managing to exist. There is a quiet truth to the fragility around you. It is not spoken aloud. People rarely say such things, as if acknowledging them might bring some unwanted fortune. Yet you feel it settling into your awareness. This city is beautiful in the way a lantern is beautiful, glowing softly even as the flame inside threatens its delicate frame. As you walk farther, the lanes begin to narrow again, folding inward like corridors in an old memory. Children in uniforms hurry past, their wooden getter clacking lightly against the ground, leaving behind rhythms that echo between the houses. One girl carries a book strapped with twine. Its pages flutter as she runs, sending paper-thin whispers into the air. She vanishes around a corner, her footsteps fading into nothing. You find yourself drawn toward the small market district where the crowds gather even in the early hours. Wooden stalls cluster together like old relatives, leaning slightly as though sharing secrets. Vendors call out softly, their voices worn but steady, offering vegetables grown in tiny backyard plots, sweet potatoes roasted over metal drums, bundles of straw sandals piled like small nests. A man sells lamps made of paper stretched across bamboo ribs. When he lights one to demonstrate, the entire lantern glows with such softness that it looks less like an object and more like a fragile moon cupped between his hands. A gust of wind catches the loose sleeve of your coat, brushing it gently against your side. You look up to see the sky, pale and thin, as if light itself is hesitant today. The clouds drift in loose, frayed shapes, patches of grey and white that seem to echo the city below. There is no sense of threat in the air, no rumour of change, yet the fragility in the light, the thinness of the shadows, the way every structure seems to barely hold itself upright. These details leave a faint, quiet impression in your bones. You step into a side street where the buildings crowd even closer together. Here the shadows lie in long, soft layers, folding over one another like fabric. The air feels cooler, untouched by the sun. As you walk, the ground creaks beneath your sandals, the boards beneath the dirt giving the slightest protest, as though reminding you they are older than they look. A bicycle leans against a fence, its metal frame chipped and rusted in places. The front wheel spins slightly, pushed by the faintest breath of wind. The spinning is so slow, so reluctant, that you feel compelled to pause and watch until it stops. Farther ahead, a man sits on a wooden stool, repairing the handle of a bucket. His face is lined deeply, the grooves on his cheeks and forehead carved by years rather than expression. When he glances up, his eyes hold a gentleness that feels out of place in someone who has likely seen hardship. He nods once, quietly, then returns to his work, the slow scrape of a small knife shaping the handle into smoothness. The street bends left and you follow it. The houses here seem even more delicate than before. Walls patched with paper that is yellowed from sun and time, roofs that dip slightly at the corners, wooden frames that look as though they would sigh if touched. It is impossible to ignore the truth of it. This entire part of the city feels like it has been assembled from breath and shadow, held together by nothing more than trust in the quiet routines of daily life. You walk past a home where a seamstress sits by her door, stitching repairs into a kimono. The fabric pulls in her lap like water held back by careful hands. She lifts her head when she hears you, offering a small smile that is more weary acknowledgement than greeting. The needle glints in the pale light as she returns to her work, drawing the thread through worn cloth with a patience born of necessity. You move on, letting the city guide you. Each step reveals something small, something ordinary. A pair of sandals left neatly outside a door, a chipped bowl resting on a wooden shelf, a lantern with a tear in its paper, its flame struggling to stay whole. These details create a quiet chorus of impermanence. You feel it settling into your thoughts. Not fear, not worry, but a delicate awareness that the world around you exists, in a state of gentle uncertainty. By midday, the light has sharpened, but the city remains soft. You find yourself in a place where the road widens just enough for sunlight to spill freely. The brightness touches the rooftops, and for a brief moment the paper windows glow, as though lit from within. The wind stirs again, and the shadows shift across the wooden walls, long and slow, like thin waves. You pause, just for a breath, just for the time it takes to feel the stillness settle around you. The city stands quietly, a fragile collection of rooms and corners, of daily habits and unspoken hopes. You exhale, watching the warmth fade into the cool air. In the gentle brightness of the afternoon, Tokyo feels like a lantern suspended in a wide, uncertain world, glowing softly, delicately, beautifully, held together by thin paper, warm wood, and the quiet will of those who call it home. You feel the shift long before you name it. Afternoon has thinned into a pale, weakened light, that fragile hour when the city seems to pause between breaths. You had been standing near the edge of a small canal, watching the water move sluggishly between its worn stone banks. The reflection of the sky wavered with each ripple, soft and indistinct, as though the day were losing interest in holding its shape. You turn toward home with no particular haste, just following the gentle pull of habit. The air feels cooler than it should for the hour, a subtle change that makes your skin tighten. As you walk, the wooden houses along the lane glow faintly where the light touches them, their edges softened by the dimming day. A faint breeze slips between the rooftops, carrying with it the distant scent of something metallic. Not strong, not alarming, just unfamiliar enough to notice. You reach your doorway and slide the shoji open with the same quiet motion you've done countless times. Inside, the faint warmth of the room greets you. The lamp is unlit, but the remaining daylight filters through the paper screens with a gentle, greyish glow. You stand there a moment, your hand resting on the wooden frame, letting your eyes adjust to the shifting tones of the room. That's when you hear it, a sound barely more than a tremor in the air, a hum, far off, stretched thin by distance, so faint at first that it seems it could be nothing more than a cart rolling over uneven boards. Somewhere down the street, you tilt your head slightly, listening. The hum continues, not steady but wavering, like something hesitating before finding its voice. You step back outside, letting the door remain half open. The lane is mostly empty. A man carrying a small sack walks farther down. Unaware, the woman who had been sweeping earlier is gone. Her broom leans silently against the wall. A stray cat pauses mid-step, ears twitching as though it too senses something uncertain in the air. The hum grows clearer, not loud, not urgent, just more definite. A trembling thread of sound that feels as though it is coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. You take another step outside and stand fully in the lane. The sky overhead has darkened further, sliding into a muted shade of blue-grey clouds gather loosely, but their shapes are hard to read. The light seems too thin now, as if evening has decided to arrive early. The sound stretches again, a little longer this time, a distant waver that seems to brush the rooftops before dissolving. It takes you a few breaths before recognition settles in. Not fear, not panic, just recognition. Quiet and cold at its edges, the sirens. They have always begun like this, as though unsure if they should disturb the day. You stand still, your breath held somewhere in your chest. The sound drifts over the city in gentle waves, each one a little stronger than the last, but still distant enough that it feels like a question rather than a warning. A neighbour slides open his window. He leans out slightly, squinting toward the sky, though there is nothing to see. He does not say anything. He simply listens, his face calm but tight around the eyes. When he notices you, he gives a small nod, acknowledgement without conversation, and disappears back inside. The sirens continue, rising and falling in slow, uncertain intervals. You listen to them the way one listens to a story, told in a language barely understood, catching fragments, missing others, unsure which parts matter most. A woman emerges from a nearby doorway, holding her daughter's hand. The girl clutches a small wooden toy, its paint chipped at the edges. They stand beside their house, both looking in the same vague direction as the sound. Neither moves. The woman's thumb gently strokes the child's knuckles in a rhythm that seems more for herself than for the girl. A rickshaw driver pulls to a slow stop in the middle of the street. His hands rest quietly on the handlebars. He does not turn around. He simply waits, breath held, eyes fixed on the sky as though listening for something beyond the sirens, something the rest of you have not yet noticed. The sirens lengthen again, and this time the sound washes over the street with a trembling certainty. Not loud, but no longer tentative. You rest your hand against the wooden frame of your door. The grain beneath your palm feels rougher now, as if the wood itself has tensed. The faint breeze carries the sound in uneven ripples. It doesn't urge you to run. It doesn't demand anything of you. It simply suspends you in a moment that stretches wider than the lane, wider than the city. You step inside again, only far enough to place your sandals neatly by the mat, then return to the doorway. The room behind you feels dim, touched by the unsettled light. Shadows hang in loose folds across the floor, shifting softly when the breeze brushes the paper screens. The hum rises for a fifth time, longer, steadier. Now, unmistakably, a warning. You inhale slowly, letting the breath fill you as though anchoring you to the ground. There is no rush in your movements, only a quiet awareness settling more fully into your bones. You look down the lane, watching as doors close with gentle clicks. A man begins gathering crates from outside his home, stacking them inside with practiced motions that reveal neither panic nor calm, just routine shaped by necessity. A child's voice calls out from somewhere behind a fence, followed by a mother's reply, soft and composed. The sound of a kettle lid clinking gently on a stove drifts from another house. Even in this moment, life continues in small, fragile ways, as though refusing to let the sirens decide how the evening should unfold. You look upward again, though there is still nothing in the sky but a deepening blue. The clouds drift slowly, their edges fading into each other like ash dissolving in water. A low wind moves through the narrow street, stirring the paper lanterns that hang from the eaves. Their light trembles faintly, casting delicate wavering shadows along the ground. Another siren call sweeps across the district, longer, clearer, carrying with it a texture you have felt before. Not dread, not yet, but the outline of possibility. The city around you seems to hold its breath in return. You step away from the doorway and walk a short distance down the lane. The ground beneath your feet feels firmer than usual, as if bracing itself. A few people emerge from their homes, not walking, not running, just standing, listening with the same suspended stillness that holds you. A man farther down adjusts the strap on his shoulder bag, though he does not move from his spot. His eyes fix on the horizon where the sound seems to originate. A faint glow touches the clouds beyond the rooftops, though it might be just the last remnants of daylight. You cannot tell. No one speaks, even whispers feel too heavy for the moment. The sirens waver again, this time joined by a low, distant pulse beneath them. A faint thum-thum-thum, more felt than heard. It reaches you like a vibration, carried through the bones of the city, the kind of sound that seems to move inside the earth rather than above it. You focus on it without meaning to, letting the faint rhythm seep into your awareness. It feels slow, deliberate, as though approaching from very far away. The sirens stretch over it like thin fabric, unable to fully conceal what lies beneath. Another pulse, then another, each one slightly stronger. You swallow without realizing it. The air feels cooler, almost metallic, brushing against the back of your throat. You wrap your arms loosely around yourself, not out of fear, but to hold on to the warmth that lingers from the day. Around you, the neighborhood settles into a quiet that feels almost reverent. Lanterns sway softly, shadows lengthen. The sirens continue their trembling rise and fall, no longer hesitant, but not yet urgent. The humming rhythm beneath them grows more certain, threading through the wooden bones of the houses, travelling along the narrow lanes, gathering itself somewhere beyond the edges of the city. You listen deeply, letting the layers of sound overlap in your mind. The sirens, the distant thrum, the restless wind slipping through the eaves. The moment stretches, long and delicate, like a paper screen caught between light and shadow. You stand there, suspended, the cool air brushing the back of your neck, the ground steady beneath your feet. Somewhere far beyond the rooftops, something is moving toward Tokyo. Not fast, not yet clear, but enough that the air has begun to tremble with its arrival. You notice it first in the way the colour of the night shifts, just a little, as though the air has begun to remember daylight again. A pale shimmer spreads behind the rooftops, faint as the blush of dawn, yet the hour is nowhere near morning. You lift your gaze toward the sky, expecting to see stars scattered like quiet witnesses. Instead, you see the glow deepen, gathering strength with a strange, smouldering patience. A thin flake drifts down. It hangs in the air for a long moment, turning gently, as though deciding where to land. At first, you think it's a scrap of paper caught in a stray breeze, wandering without urgency, but when it touches your sleeve, it dissolves into a grey smear that crumbles at the slightest gesture. Ash, so soft it breaks apart like breath. Another speck follows, then another, until the entire sky seems to loosen, releasing its fragile burden. It falls soundlessly, as if determined not to disturb the hush already settling over the streets. You stand still, feeling the faint tickle of warm dust as it brushes your skin. It doesn't sting. It barely weighs anything, yet it carries a heaviness that the body doesn't understand, one that sinks inward instead of settling on the fabric of your clothes. The glow overhead thickens, blooming across the horizon like a slow-moving birth of fire. You know the direction. Though you don't need to name it, you simply watch as the colour deepens. A molten orange, wrapped inside a veil of smoke, flickering with restless movement. And still, the ash continues to fall, drifting across the rooftops, softening the edges of everything it touches until the familiar shapes begin to blur. You take a step forward, almost without realising it, drawn by the strange quiet unfolding around you. It feels like stepping into a winter that never learned to be cold. The flakes gather in the corners of door frames, in the grooves between stones, in the roofs of bicycles, leaning against walls, as if their owners might return at any moment. The city absorbs the ash in a way that suggests it has always been waiting for something to settle upon it. The air tastes warm, but not alarming. Just thick, as though it has grown thoughtful. A faint smell lingers in the stillness, something like burnt cedar mixed with the sweetness of old tatami mats. It wraps around you gently, almost mournfully, carrying traces of things you recognize but can't place. A wooden shelf, a neighbour's porch, a shop sign painted by a quiet hand many years ago. Scents rise and fade like distant memories leaving no footprints. You watch a thin layer of ash collect along your fingers, faint as powdered chalk. The flakes break apart when you exhale, carried away by your breath. They seem determined to travel somewhere else, to land on surfaces that will cradle them a little longer. You move your hand through the air, and more flakes gather on your palm, weightless as ghostly pollen, drifting from a blooming world unseen. Above you, the glow pulses faintly, as if the sky itself has grown restless. But the night remains strangely gentle. No rushing crowds, no shouts rising from far streets, just the steady fall of warm snowflakes made of someone's belongings, someone's garden fence, someone's carefully folded quilts drying on a line. The city feels suspended in time, wrapped in its own sigh. You begin to walk, more out of instinct than purpose. Each step sends a small puff of ash rising around your ankles, swirling lightly before settling again in soft resignation. The ground feels unchanged beneath your feet, firm, dependable, unaware that its surface has been remade into a pale landscape. Lamps lining the street cast elongated halos through the drifting haze, their glow diffused until they seem wrapped in silk. The shadows they leave behind soften, smoothing into gentle silhouettes. In the distance you hear a faint crackle, not sharp or sudden, but rhythmic, almost like the sound of old paper curling over a flame. It comes and goes, carried on a breeze that barely disturbs the hem of your sleeves. The wind feels warm when it brushes past, like someone exhaling after a long pause. It brings with it more ash, swirling upward before spiraling back down in slow, deliberate arcs. You pause beside a stone wall, its surface mottled with light and shadow. Ash collects along the top edge, forming a delicate ridge like frost. You run your fingers along it, watching the particles loosen and drift off in a faint cascade. There is something almost reverent in the way they move, as though refusing to leave the world too abruptly. In the alley ahead, a small shape sits unmoving, a wicker basket left near a doorway. Ash has settled inside it, filling the woven bottom like fine sand. A single spoon rests beside it, half buried, catching the flicker of distant light in a muted shimmer. You don't touch it. You simply observe, absorbing the quiet way the world rearranges itself without asking permission. A soft murmur rises somewhere overhead, a low rumble far beyond the city rooftops. It vibrates more than it sounds, passing over your skin like distant thunder, trying not to intrude. The sky responds with a deeper glow, the smoke thickening into slow-moving clouds. The colour shifts through shades of orange and rosewood, creating a strange beauty that feels almost forbidden to witness. A fragment of charred wood drifts downward, larger than the flakes around it. It twirls lazily before landing near your feet. When you crouch to look at it, you see that the grain is still visible beneath the blackened surface, a tiny piece of something once held in a familiar hand. You brush it lightly and it crumbles instantly, turning into a soft pile that scatters with your movement. You straighten again, letting your breath settle. The air has grown heavier now, but not oppressive, just full, as though holding too many stories at once. You inhale slowly, feeling the warmth of it press against your ribs like a gentle weight. It reminds you of summer evenings when the humidity wrapped around everything. Slowing time until the world felt half asleep tonight carries that same drowsiness, but with a quieter undercurrent, a kind of fragile solemnity woven into the air. A distant lantern sways slightly, perhaps nudged by a wandering breeze. Its glow flickers through the haze, casting moving shadows that stretch across the narrow street like long fingers reaching for something they can't quite grasp. You watch the movement for a moment, then continue walking, letting the soft crunch of a settling ash follow each step. Somewhere behind you, a faint whistle rises, thin, wavering, uncertain. It doesn't alarm you. It simply exists, threading through the night like a note played too softly to be heard clearly. Then it fades, absorbed into the thickening sky, leaving only the gentle rain of embers in its wake. The city breathes slowly around you, Wooden eaves creak with quiet resignation. Fabric signs sway with barely noticeable motion. Pots by doorways gather their own small dunes of ash. Everything feels touched by the same delicate snowfall, united under a blanket woven from the remnants of what once stood in the path of distant fire. You pause again, letting your gaze travel upward. The sky glows brighter now, but its light feels strangely soft, blunted by the drifting veil of smoke. The moon, hidden somewhere behind that shifting curtain, sends no reassurance. The stars have retreated entirely, leaving the firelit haze to claim the night. A warmth brushes your cheek, a small ember drifting close enough to glow faintly before dimming. You catch it without thinking, closing your hand around it gently. When you open your palm, only a smudge of grey remains. Even the embers have grown tired, falling without urgency. You exhale, long and slow. The ash continues to fall, and you stand in its quiet snowfall, wrapped in a night that feels endless. Not dangerous, not gentle, but suspended somewhere between the two. A night with its own rhythm, its own weight, its own whispered promise that the world is changing, even when no one speaks it aloud. A night that asks nothing of you, except to witness how softly things can disappear. You sense it before you understand it. An almost imperceptible stirring in the stillness, the way a pond trembles before a stone touches the surface. At first it feels as though the ground beneath your feet has taken a slow breath, drawing the air inward in a long, reluctant pull. The night seems to lean into itself, bracing for something it cannot name. Then the sound comes. It does not arrive suddenly, nor does it rip through the air in a single violent shudder. Instead, it grows as if summoned from the earth, rising from a depth you never realized the world possessed. A low rumble spreads beneath the soles of your feet, soft enough to mistake for distant machinery, but too vast, too deliberate, to belong to anything man-made on the ground. You pause, letting the vibration settle into your bones. It reverberates through your ribs with a slow, steady insistence, less a noise than a presence. Something large and unseen pressing its weight into the city from above. The ash falling around you trembles in its descent, wavering like tiny feathers caught in an unsettled breath. You lift your eyes toward the sky. The glow on the horizon, once gentle in its strange beauty, has thickened into something more urgent. It pulses faintly, as if stirred by the same deep vibration that thrums through your chest. The smoky air shifts in subtle waves. Lantern halos shiver. The world seems to hold its breath. The sound deepens, spreading outward until it no longer feels like a single vibration, but a layered chorus, each tone overlapping to create a heavy, resonant hum. It rolls across rooftops, slides through narrow alleys, slips beneath wooden eaves that have known decades of quiet. The city absorbs it unwillingly, like an object long used to silence, suddenly asked to carry weight. You place your hand on the nearest wall, and even the stone seems to hum. The vibration crawls up your arm, settling in the space between your shoulder blades. It is not painful, but it demands attention, an unfamiliar insistence, like a distant memory trying to claw its way back into the present. Overhead, the haze begins to shift. It moves not with the wandering softness of rising smoke, but with the deliberate push of something within. You hear another layer of the sound now, higher, sharper, threading through the deeper rumble, like a thin wire pulled taut. It cuts through the warmth in the air, leaving a faint metallic aftertaste on your tongue. You step forward, unsure why, perhaps to see better, or simply because the sound seems to pull you along with it. Your footsteps leave shallow impressions in the settling ash, each step sending up a small puff that dances briefly before sinking back down. The city feels strangely weightless beneath the growing thunder, as though the vibration might shake loose whatever memories it clings to. The rumble expands, filling the sky with a kind of restless gravity. Somewhere far above the drifting smoke, shapes begin to move. dark outlines passing across the faintly glowing clouds. They do not reveal themselves fully, only trace their shadows in passing, each one swallowed almost immediately by the haze. Their motion is steady, deliberate, synchronized. You watch them glide like great black birds that have forgotten how to sing. The sound they carry merges with the night, so deep it seems to pull the air downward, flattening the silence beneath it. You feel it in the back of your throat, humming against your pulse. It resonates through the timber of nearby homes, rattling shoji screens and stirring loose tiles on distant rooftops. And still, you listen. Somewhere nearby, a wooden wind chime stirs. Its soft, brittle notes cling to the thick air for a moment before vanishing beneath the steady thunder overhead. The sound is so small it barely exists, but it brushes against your awareness like a reminder of gentler nights. Nights when the city breathed calmly, when its rhythms were predictable, when its sounds came from known places. Now everything feels foreign and vast. A warm gust sweeps through the street, swirling ash around your ankles. It carries with it a faint scent of kerosene, thin and ghost-like, as if drifting from somewhere impossibly distant. The smell mixes with the burned cedar already hanging in the air, creating a layered atmosphere that clings to the inside of your nose. You tilt your head, trying to separate the tones within the growing thunder. There is the low hum that sinks into the ground, the mid-range rumble that fills the air like an oncoming storm, and the faint whine that cuts through them both with a piercing clarity you feel more than hear. Together, they create a sound that feels almost alive, shifting, swelling, reaching. The sky above deepens into a molten colour as the glow thickens behind the smoke. The rumbling grows louder, though not suddenly. It expands like a rising tide, creeping over you until it fills your awareness completely. You feel the world narrowing, not in fear, but in an odd sense of inevitability, like standing at the edge of a vast plain as a distant storm unrolls its long shadow across the horizon. A paper lantern swings violently on its hook, tugged by a sudden draft. Its thin walls crackle as they rub against the wooden frame. The light inside wavers, throwing erratic shapes across the street. The shadows stretch long and distorted, swaying as if caught in a slow-moving dance, orchestrated by the tremors from above. You watch a cluster of ash flakes lift from the ground, spiraling upward in defiance of gravity. They rise into the vibrating air, illuminated briefly by the lantern's flickering glow, before disappearing into the dense veil of smoke gathering overhead. For a moment, they almost resemble snowflakes swirling in a winter wind, though their warmth betrays the illusion. The sound intensifies again, not violently, but with a kind of purposeful expansion, an inevitable escalation, as though the sky is drawing closer with each passing breath. The vibration spreads up your spine, tightening the muscles in your neck. You exhale slowly, grounding yourself with the familiar rhythm of your breath, but even your breath feels different now, pulled thin by the thickening air. Around you, the houses seem to brace themselves. The wooden beams groan softly, not in protest, but in weary expectation. Paper screens tremble with each wave of sound, their surfaces fluttering like fragile wings. Loose pieces of debris skitter along the ground, nudged by unseen tremors. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the vibration surround you. With your vision dimmed, the sound becomes even more immense. An ocean of low thunder rolling through the city with deliberate patience. It feels like a threshold, a point beyond which the world will shift into something unrecognizable. When you open your eyes again, the glow overhead has sharpened. The horizon pulses with an intensity that seems to reach across the city, reflecting off the drifting smoke in strange shifting patterns. The ash glimmers faintly in the firelight, giving each falling flake a muted shimmer. For the first time, you sense the sound is not simply passing through, it is arriving. A long resonant boom emerges from the layered rumble, still distant but unmistakable. It rolls through the sky, deeper than thunder, heavier than anything the earth creates on its own. The air compresses for a moment, pressing against your skin with a firm, invisible hand. When it releases, the night expands outward again, exhaling in a long, trembling sigh. You feel the change settle into your bones. The world is shifting. The sound that brought it here continues its slow, relentless approach, reshaping the sky with each passing breath. And you stand in the quiet street, surrounded by ash, wrapped in smoke, held in the trembling arms of a city on the edge of something vast, listening as the night gives way to a new, unspoken reality. The first thing you notice is the change in temperature beneath your feet. It happens gradually, almost politely, as though the ground is offering a quiet warning before revealing the depth of its transformation. The warmth rising through your soles is not the gentle kind, left over from a long day of sunlight. It carries a sharper edge, a whisper of something molten, threading its way into the fabric of the city. You walk carefully, though not with urgency. Ash drifts around you in slow spirals, catching faint glimmers from the deepening glow overhead. The air feels thick, pressing softly against your skin like the weight of a fevered dream. You let your hand slide along the side of a wooden wall as you pass, and the surface radiates a faint heat that wasn't there moments earlier. It seeps into your palm, lingering even after you pull your hand away. The alleys narrow as you continue forward, their walls leaning toward one another, the way old neighbours do when trading secrets. The shadows between them shift under the wavering light, reshaping themselves with each pulse from the sky. You notice how the darkness seems to curl at the edges, as though recoiling from the growing warmth. A breeze pushes through the street, carrying with it a wave of heat that brushes against your face like an oven door eased open. It isn't a violent gust, it moves with a slow, deliberate sweep, heavy with particles of glowing dust. The ash no longer falls gently, it swirls, caught in invisible currents rising from the earth itself. You take another step and the ground responds with a soft crackle, a sound like dried leaves crumbling underfoot. The wooden slats beneath a nearby awning creak as they expand, shifting with the temperature. Farther down the street, you hear a low groan as a roof beam flexes, adjusting to the heat, the way a tired body might stretch in discomfort. The air tastes different now. It carries a metallic note, faint but insistent, like the edge of something newly forged. Each breath warms your throat, settling inside you with a sluggish weight that makes your chest feel momentarily fuller. You slow your breathing to match the rhythm of the night, long and measured, letting the sensation wash through you without resistance. You pass a row of small shops, their wooden exteriors darkened by the glow. Fabric signs hanging above their doors ripple slightly, their edges curling as the heat tightens the fibres. The designs printed on them, kanji faded by years of sun and rain, distort as the cloth pulls inward. The colours deepen, taking on the look of ink bleeding through wet parchment. A puddle at the base of a gutter catches your eye. It's shallow, no more than a thin sheet spread across uneven stone. The surface shimmers in the flickering light, but the movement beneath it is what draws your attention. Tiny ripples spread outward, without any visible cause, as though the water itself is trembling. When a breeze stirs, the surface breaks apart entirely, releasing a faint hiss before settling into stillness again. The scent rising from it is warm, tinged with the smell of scorched metal. You continue down the alley, letting the heat trace the contours of your body. It forms pockets around you, thick in some places, thinner in others. Like invisible currents shaping themselves around your movements, each step carries you deeper into a space where warmth has begun to sharpen into something more precise, more focused. A wooden bucket beside a doorway has begun to warp. Its rings stretch outward, no longer perfectly round. You watch a bead of moisture slip down its side, trailing over the grain like a tear. It sizzles faintly when it reaches the stone below, disappearing before it fully forms. Inside the bucket, the cloths once dampened for household chores lie stiff and brittle, their surfaces cracking at the edges. Further ahead, a long strip of paper flutters against a post, its corners darkening as the heat licks at it like a cautious flame. The ink characters printed upon it blur slightly, the strokes softening as though sinking into the fibres. With each shift of air, the paper clings closer to the wood, the way skin might cling to bone in a fever. The streets widen briefly, allowing the heat to gather more openly. It rises in invisible columns, distorting the air so that the world beyond bends and wavers like a reflection. On disturbed water, buildings seem to ripple, their outlines shifting with each pulse of warmth. The lanterns hanging overhead glow more intensely, their interiors flickering as the flames inside struggle against the changing air. You stop at the edge of what once might have been a well-trodden intersection, now a shallow basin of shimmering heat. The stones underfoot radiate a slow burn that seeps upward, warming your legs. You lift one foot slightly, feeling the heat cling to the sole of your sandal before reluctantly letting go. The sensation lingers, spreading through your body like a memory refusing to fade. A faint rumble, not as deep as the one that shook the sky earlier, moves through the street. It travels across the stones, vibrating the air with a soft tremor. Loose debris, small twigs, bits of paper, stray leaves stir in its wake, skittering across the ground, as though urged along by an unseen hand. The heat appears to feed on the motion, rising in thin, wavering curtains. A cat darts from beneath a staircase, its fur bristling. It moves low to the ground, its steps quick and careful, avoiding patches of stone that radiate more heat than others. Its tail flicks erratically, disturbed by sensations it cannot fully understand. You watch it disappear into a narrow slit between buildings, swallowed instantly by shadow. You move again, your steps steady, your breath slow. The heat curls around your ankles like restless spirits, tugging at the edges of your clothing. You feel the fibres warm against your skin, though not yet uncomfortably. There is still a strange calm inside you, an acceptance without reason, a steadiness born not from courage, but from the simple momentum of moving forward. Trees lining a nearby courtyard sway ever so slightly. Their leaves, once vibrant even at night, now droop under the weight of rising heat. Some curl inward, their tips darkening to a brittle brown. A single leaf detaches, drifting downward in a twisting motion. When it touches the ground, it crispens instantly, dissolving into a thin curl of smoke. A thin stream of water, once used to wash vegetables, runs along a shallow gutter near the edge of the street. Its flow has slowed to a sluggish crawl. The heat rising from the stones bends the surface of the water, making it shimmer erratically. A small bubble forms, then bursts with a soft pop. Releasing another faint hiss, the warmth clinging to the air thickens around the gutter, turning the trickle into a narrow ribbon of fog. You notice the way your footsteps echo differently now. Not sharp, but muted, as if swallowed by the air before they can fully form. The heat absorbs sound, leaving behind a strange quiet that feels almost reverential. Even the distant noise in the sky seems further away, softened by the dense atmosphere pressing in around you. The edges of the wooden buildings begin to glimmer, not with flame, but with a subtle sheen, as though the oils within the beams have risen to the surface under the stress of the heat. When the breeze shifts again, the smell intensifies. It carries hints of resin, sap, and old lacquer warming under a relentless touch. The scent wraps around you, thick and nostalgic, stirring memories of summer afternoons when the sun pressed too heavily on rooftops. A small cart sits abandoned at the corner of the street, its wheels resting unevenly on stones that have begun to crack with thermal stress. The lacquered handles glisten, droplets forming along their length like dew made of sweat. Inside the cart, Bundles of vegetables lie wilted, their skins shriveling, as the heat pulls moisture from them. A head of cabbage has collapsed inward, its outer leaves curling toward its core like protective hands. You continue your steady pace, letting the air shift and curl around you. The heat trails behind every movement, following you like a slow, deliberate tide. Yet your steps remain calm, unhurried, each one falling softly into the next. The night has reshaped itself, but you move through it as though guided by a rhythm older than fear. Above you, the sky pulses again, an orange glow expanding and contracting like the slow throb of a distant heartbeat. It silhouettes the drifting smoke, revealing the vast currents swirling through the air. The warmth from above and the heat from below meet in the space around you, creating an atmosphere that feels heavy enough to hold its own stories. As you walk deeper into the city, the alleys bend and twist, their paths illuminated by the wavering light that clings to the drifting ash. The heat grows more complex, no longer simply warmth turned sharper, but something layered, rich, heavy, and alive. It threads through the streets like a river of invisible fire, shaping the world one rising breath at a time. Still, you move forward, calm, measured, one step after another. The streets may be turning to rivers of heat, but you remain steady within their glow, carried through the shifting night by something quiet, patient, and enduring. Flames paint the darkness with uneasy brilliance, turning familiar shapes into silhouettes that wobble in the shimmering air. You feel suspended in a dream, where everything glows too brightly, nothing looks real anymore, yet everything feels painfully sharp, sharper than thought, sharper than fear. The heat distorts the edges of the world, and as you move, the lines of the city shudder like reflections in disturbed water. The night should be deep, quiet, and comfortably dim, but instead it pulses with a brightness that presses against your eyes. It's as if the sky has descended, bringing with it a blinding, restless energy. Colours ripple where they shouldn't exist, reds dancing through the smoke in streaks and curls, their movement too alive to be trusted. You lift your gaze to what remains of the horizon and see that even the moon hides behind drifts of rising ash, its pale face swallowed by the trembling orange glow that consumes the streets. You step forward, but the ground responds with a soft crunch, not of snow, not of gravel, but something brittle that once belonged to buildings, streets, or perhaps lives. It clings to your sandals and toes, sticking lightly like crushed shells. With each movement, the dust rises in quiet clouds that shimmer eerily in the shifting light, as if illuminated from within. Your breath feels heavier than before, as though the air itself thickens with every passing second. When you inhale, there's an edge of warmth behind the smell of smoke, almost sweet, almost metallic, impossible to name. It settles at the back of your throat, a lingering presence that makes you swallow with a strange, deliberate care. Somewhere deeper in the city, a wooden beam collapses with a long groaning sigh. The sound drifts toward you, bending strangely through the distorted air. It arrives softened, almost gentle, nothing like the violence that caused it. That gentleness unsettles you more than the crash itself. You wait, listening for another break, another voice from the crumbling structures around you, but the moment stretches without interruption. The world becomes a series of half-seen shapes. What was once a row of shops now forms an uneven line of glowing ribs, the interiors lit through cracks like lanterns, about to burn through their own frames. Shadows slip between them. Not figures, you tell yourself. Just the flicker of flames and the breath of wind. Yet the shapes feel nearly alive, shifting too quickly, too fluidly for comfort. Your steps take you past a fallen cart, its wooden wheels still intact, despite the scorched fabric draped over it. The cloth trembles faintly in the heated breeze, moving in small, elegant waves that remind you of laundry drying on a warm spring day, except that nothing here belongs to spring. Nothing here remains untouched. You pause for just a heartbeat, studying the movement, half expecting a familiar voice to call from a doorway or window, but the air offers nothing except the quiet hum of flame. You press on, drawn by something you can't name, not escape, not direction, simply the instinct to move. The brightness around you wavers, gently at first, then more insistently, as though the night itself struggles to stay balanced. Every building glows in an uncanny way, light escaping from its seams like lanterns cracked open. You feel as though you're walking inside the ribs of a city-sized creature, each street a narrow artery pulsing with heat. Your hand brushes a nearby wall, more out of habit than need, but you recoil instantly. The surface radiates warmth far beyond comfort, like the inside of a ceramic bowl lifted from an oven. The heat pulses in slow intervals, swelling and fading, almost mimicking breath. You stare at your hand for a moment, surprised not to see any visible burn, then tuck it close to your body, as if protecting it from something you cannot see. Far ahead, figures move through the brightness, silhouettes bent forward, shielding their faces with cloth or sleeves. Their shapes blur just at the edges, warped by the rising waves of heat. You think to call out to ask if they know where safety lies, but your voice remains locked behind your breath. It feels too strange to speak here, where even sound seems fragile. Instead, you follow at a quiet distance, letting their uncertain movement guide you. They pass through drifting curtains of smoke that wrap around them with soft, translucent folds. The smoke rises in elegant spirals, each swirl illuminated by the glow below, creating patterns that feel almost ceremonial. You move through the same folds moments later, feeling them settle over your shoulders like warm veils. A faint sting meets your eyes, but you blink it away, not stopping. You reach a narrow stretch of road where the flames seem to gather in clusters, drawing themselves upward like restless spirits. Their movement is mesmerizing, a dance without rhythm, without goal. Guided only by the whims of the wind, every flicker sharpens the surrounding brightness until it feels as though the entire night has turned into a single, trembling flame. Your ears catch a sound, something slow, steady, almost like breathing. At first you think it comes from the buildings, but as you listen more closely, you realize it comes from the fire itself. The flames inhale and exhale with uncanny rhythm, each breath pulling warmth through the alleys like a tide. You step back automatically, your heart tightening, even though your movements remain surprisingly composed. The brightness begins to blur at the edges of your vision, not from tears or smoke, but from sheer intensity. Shadows stretch in impossible directions, growing tall one moment and shrinking the next. The ground itself seems to shimmer, as if the world beneath you is made of heat rather than earth. You feel as though you're walking inside a dream that refuses to stay still. As you turn down another alley, the glow softens momentarily, allowing the night to reclaim a sliver of its natural darkness. A small relief washes over you, the faint dimness offering a moment of stillness. After the relentless brightness, you pause there, leaning lightly against a post that has somehow escaped the worst of the heat. The wood is warm, but not dangerously so, and for a moment you simply breathe, slow, deep, deliberate breaths that steady the space around you. A soft flurry drifts past your face, not ash this time, but tiny glowing flecks lifted by a sudden gust. They swirl upward, carried by currents you cannot see, dancing like fireflies born from the broken city. You watch their ascent, the delicate motion so strangely beautiful that you stand still for several long seconds. Even in destruction, something in the world insists on moving with grace. The wind shifts again, guiding you forward. You move with it, not resisting, trusting the small instinct that keeps your steps aligned. The brightness gradually returns, blooming at the edges of your path until the world ahead glows once more. The light bends around corners, spills over rooftops, and paints the air with a soft radiance that feels both peaceful and terrifying. You cross another street and find yourself facing what used to be a grand wooden structure. Perhaps a shop, perhaps a home. It is impossible to tell now. The fire clings to it with determined persistence, wrapping each beam in liquid brightness. The flames move with an unsettling elegance, their motion too purposeful to be ignored. They curl upward, reaching toward the sky with delicate, trembling fingers. Your shadow stretches across the glowing street, long and thin, bending strangely as it meets the waves of heat. It flickers like a candle flame, never holding its shape for more than a moment. You study it, feeling oddly detached, as though you are watching someone else walk through the brightness. Your movements look dreamlike, suspended between urgency and calm. Then above the distant crackles and soft breaths of flame, you hear a sound, faint, narrow and wavering. Not sirens, not voices. Something else, something that threads through the air with a fragile determination. You listen closely, waiting for it to come again. When it does, the tone wavers, almost musical, bending in the heat-distorted night. You follow the sound without hesitation, letting it anchor you to something outside the blinding glow. You move carefully, stepping around debris, through shifting curtains of smoke, and past windows that shimmer like pools of liquid light. Your pace remains even, surprisingly steady, guided more by instinct than thought. As you walk, the brightness smooths into a soft, constant glow. Not gentle, not safe, but strangely uniform. The flames behind you continue their restless dance, but here the light gathers into something more diffused, as if the world has settled into a single, glowing breath. You feel suspended between two realities, the frantic heat behind you, and this calmer, though no less dangerous, radiance ahead. Another gust of wind brushes past, carrying with it a new wave of warmth. It wraps around you gently at first, then more insistently, urging you to keep moving. You follow its guidance, your steps quiet on the dusty street. The brightness thickens as you move forward until the night dissolves completely into shimmering light. For a moment, you wonder if dawn has arrived early, not the true dawn, but some strange imitation created by fire and smoke. The thought barely forms before the brightness shifts again, deepening in tone, pulsing like a heartbeat. You can almost sense the city breathing beneath your feet, each pulse sending a subtle tremor through the air. You take another step, then another, moving deeper into the glowing world. The night, overwhelmed by flames, loses its boundaries. It becomes something new, a space without darkness, without certainty, where light behaves in ways it never should. And as you continue forward, the glow strengthens until it feels as though the world has dissolved into a single, shimmering blur, a dream of fire and trembling air where the night itself remembers how to shine. The brightness folds around you, guiding your steps toward whatever waits beyond the wavering heat. At last the noise thins, leaving only the rasp of your breath and the faint crackle of distant fires. The quiet feels almost tender, as if the world is apologizing for what it has done. The sudden stillness settles around you like a fragile blanket, light and uncertain, ready to tear at the slightest disturbance. You stand where the glowing night has softened, your chest rising slowly as your lungs relearn the rhythm of air instead of urgency. The space around you feels open in a way it hasn't for what could be minutes or hours. The sense of time has dissolved, melted by heat and motion, until everything exists only as a continuous stretch of sensation. You blink, trying to focus on your surroundings. But even the dim shapes waver, as if the air still quivers with memories of motion. A cooling breeze brushes past your face, gentle and unhurried. It carries the faint scent of damp earth from somewhere unseen, a whisper of a world untouched by flames. The touch surprises you. It feels like encountering something long forgotten, the idea that the wind can be soft, that the air can touch you without burning. You close your eyes briefly, letting that small comfort steady the trembling at the edges of your thoughts. Your legs feel heavy beneath you, not as though they are tired, but as if they are remembering each step taken through fire and distorted light. When you shift your weight, the ground beneath reacts with a faint crunch, small pieces of the world breaking gently underfoot. You're aware of how still you've become, rooted momentarily in the quiet, letting the silence breathe before you do. When you open your eyes, you notice that the sky above seems darker here, less overwhelmed by the glow behind you. The clouds of smoke, thin in patches, revealing slivers of night that still hold their natural depth. Stars attempt to blink through the haze, faint, flickering, almost shy. Their presence feels improbable, as though they're intruders in a world remade by fire, yet they continue to shimmer with calm resolve. You take a slow step forward, and the quiet shifts with you. It settles differently with each movement, adjusting to your presence, stretching and contracting like something alive. The only other sound is the distant crackle of flames. So far away it becomes almost rhythmic, a soft, uneven breath echoing through the city's broken ribs. Your own breathing grows steadier with each step. You inhale cautiously, letting the air slip in without the tightness that had seized your lungs earlier. The warmth still lingers, but here it feels muted, softened by distance, no longer a force pressing relentlessly against your skin. Ahead, a narrow path opens between leaning buildings. Their silhouettes loom in uncertain shapes, bent by heat and shadow. Some walls have collapsed inward, forming strange angles that catch the moonlight in fractured patterns. Other structures remain oddly upright, as if refusing to yield entirely. You move toward the passage, drawn by the gentle dimness it offers. The street is coated in a thin layer of pale dust that shifts with every step, lifting into soft spirals before settling again. Each particle seems to catch the moonlight for a brief moment, glowing faintly before dissolving into the darkness. You watch the motion quietly, recognizing in it a strange grace, something fragile persisting in the aftermath. As you walk, the silence becomes more defined. It no longer feels like the absence of noise, but something purposeful, as though the world has chosen stillness as an act of mercy. Every sound you make, the faint tap of your footsteps, the whisper of cloth brushing your skin, feels deliberate, softened by the air's gentle hold. Your eyes adjust more fully to the dimness, revealing details you hadn't noticed at first. A wooden sign hangs crookedly from a shop front, the painted characters still visible, despite the charring around the edges. A lantern lies on its side, near the doorway, its glass shattered, but its frame intact. It reflects a sliver of moonlight, creating the illusion of a tiny flame that isn't there. You pause near it, not to pick it up, but to acknowledge it. A quiet reminder that small ordinary things have outlived the chaos. The thought steadies you in an unexpected way. If something as delicate as a lantern's frame can survive, perhaps there is still room for gentleness somewhere in the world. A faint murmur rises in the distance, not loud enough to be a voice, not rhythmic enough to be machinery. It could be the wind shifting through collapsed eaves, or the settling of weakened beams. Whatever it is, it doesn't disturb the silence so much as reshape it, adding a gentle texture to the stillness around you. You listen for a moment, but the sound fades again, leaving nothing but your quiet steps. You continue forward, guided by an instinct that feels less like urgency and more like the natural pull of movement after stillness. The path leads you through another narrow gap, then into a wider street where the moonlight falls more freely. The open space allows the air to cool more quickly, and the change is immediate, a soft, refreshing touch against your face, a hint of the night that once existed before the fire claimed the sky. Here, the silence deepens. The distant crackling becomes even softer, almost an echo of itself. The buildings cast long, uneven shadows that stretch across the ground like silent guardians, watching over what remains. You walk through them, feeling the coolness of the shade wrap briefly around your ankles. A small breeze stirs again, carrying with it faint traces of something unfamiliar. A smell that hints at water, maybe from a canal or a well nearby. The scent is gentle, subtle, yet unmistakably present. It promises a different kind of quiet, one shaped not by destruction, but by the soft rhythm of water resting in the night. You find your steps unconsciously aligning with that scent, allowing it to guide you. As you move, your mind settles into a strange clarity. The chaos still exists behind you, but here it recedes, becoming a distant memory rather than an immediate force. Every sensation grows sharper in the quiet, the coolness of the air, the uneven texture of the ground beneath your feet, the faint rustle of your clothing as you walk. The world has not returned to normal, but it has become legible again, offering small signs of stability amid the uncertainty. Your breathing remains steady. You draw in a slow, deep breath, feeling the night fill your lungs in a way it hasn't since before the sky brightened. The air tastes different here, less thick, less burdened, touched by something almost clean. You let it settle inside you before releasing it gently, the exhale merging with the quiet, like a soft thread weaving into a larger fabric. A cluster of trees stands ahead, their branches silhouetted against the moonlit haze. The leaves, dim and trembling, reflect just enough light to shimmer faintly. You approach them, drawn by the rare sight of something living and unburned. When you reach the nearest tree, you place your hand gently against its trunk. The bark feels cool beneath your palm, textured but reassuringly solid. The sensation grounds you, reminding you that not everything has been transformed by fire. You remain there for a moment, your hand resting on the trunk, listening to the silence deepen around you. It feels like standing at the edge of a still pond, waiting for the surface to settle. The world holds its breath with you, offering the delicate peace of a space untouched for just a small stretch of time. When you continue walking, your steps feel lighter, as though the quiet has eased something within you. The trees thin out behind you, giving way to a small open area where the moonlight falls unhindered. The brightness here is soft, natural, the kind that invites calm rather than fear. The contrast from the earlier glow is so stark that it takes a moment for your eyes to adjust. In this open space, the silence feels different, expansive, almost warm. The air flows more freely, carrying no echoes of flames or falling beams. It feels like the kind of quiet that belongs between breaths, found only in moments when the world pauses and remembers its gentleness. You stand there for a while, letting the night settle around you. Your heartbeat slows, matching the steady rhythm of the stillness. The sky above holds its faint scattering of stars, each one distant yet softly persistent. You trace their slow shimmer with your eyes, finding comfort in their quiet endurance. Gradually, the weight of the night shifts. A soft hum rises somewhere beyond the trees, not threatening, simply present, like a reminder that the world still moves even in its quietest moments. You listen to it without tension, letting the sound weave into the silence without breaking it. When you finally move again, you do so with a calm that feels earned. Your steps carry you across the moonlit space, toward whatever shadows and dim pathways lie ahead. The quiet follows you, steady and tender, wrapping itself around your thoughts like the softest possible apology from a world that has burned too brightly. And as you walk into the deeper night, the silence becomes a companion, gentle, patient, and profoundly alive. The morning air feels brittle, filtered through a thin veil of lingering smoke. It carries a faint taste of dust and charred wood, subtle yet persistent, brushing against your tongue with every inhale. You notice immediately that the world has changed, not only in shape but in texture. The soft edges of buildings, the faint warmth of stones, the uneven surfaces of collapsed walls, all have been remade by the night's heat and the city's trembling. You move slowly, each step deliberate, letting your feet trace paths that seem both familiar and alien. The streets around you are quiet now, but in that quiet there is life, fragile and hesitant. Figures appear in the corners of alleys, emerging with an almost spectral gentleness. Each one is coated in ash, pale grey from head to toe, their movements measured, as though they are learning how to walk again. You recognise some by posture, by the tilt of a shoulder, the way a hand rests at a hip. Faces are hidden beneath the thick dust, features softened into indistinct planes, leaving identity a matter of memory and motion rather than sight. You pass one figure who pauses near a collapsed storefront. Their head dips slightly forward, hands brushing along the charred wood, as though reading the story of what once was. You do not speak and they do not glance up. The absence of gaze feels natural. The ash has muted eyes, softened mouths, and in its place lingers a quiet awareness, a shared understanding that all has been altered, that the ordinary has become fragile and faintly unreachable. Further along, a child steps carefully across broken tiles, the soles of tiny shoes making muted contact with the stone. The movement is tentative, unhurried, like the small rediscovery of rhythm after disruption. You notice how the ash clings to hair, clothing, even bare skin, transforming familiar textures into a uniform grey that binds the city's inhabitants to the morning in an almost ceremonial way. The colour is not harsh, it is soft, powdery, like the residue of sleep pressed over the world, dulling distinctions and smoothing edges. You observe another figure, an older man, leaning against a post. His hands are tucked within the sleeves of his kimono, fingers hidden beneath folds of fabric. His head is bowed slightly, and though his face is obscured, you feel the weight of years in the line of his spine, the slow rise and fall of his chest as he breathes. The ash clings to him like a second skin, tracing every wrinkle, every crease, yet somehow honouring the dignity of quiet survival. He does not lift his eyes, yet he is aware of the city around him in the most delicate of ways, acknowledging the space without disturbing it. You continue walking, careful not to disturb the ash swirling lightly in the pale sunlight. Each step lifts a faint cloud, dissipating into the still air. The sensation is intimate, tactile, almost like brushing against the soft edge of a memory. You realise that the grey covering everyone, every person, every surface, binds the world together in a strange, gentle symmetry. Everything here is altered, yet somehow, for the first time since the night began, it feels coherent. A woman emerges from behind a wall of fallen timber. She moves with careful precision, balancing across debris as though it were solid ground, even though it seems impossibly fragile. Her hair, long and dark beneath the ash, falls across her shoulders, blending with the grey that covers her robes. You sense the careful deliberation in each motion, an unspoken negotiation with the world, and you recognise the same rhythm in your own steps. Survival has become a quiet dance, measured and deliberate, silent yet deeply felt. Nearby, a small group gathers at the edge of an open courtyard. They stand in muted conversation, though their voices are quiet, almost hesitant, carried softly on the pale morning breeze. You notice the way their shoulders tilt toward one another, how one hand brushes lightly along the arm of another. Small gestures of reassurance. Faces remain obscured, but the communication is present, gentle and clear, proving that connection can persist even when identity is muted beneath ash. You walk past them, and your attention is drawn to the texture of the city itself. Stone and wood, once familiar in shape and pattern, now bear the same ashen coating as the people who move among them. The ground is powdery, yet firm enough to support your weight. The walls absorb light differently now, the cracks and collapses softened by the dust. Everything is unified by grey, And in that unity, there is a quiet, mournful beauty. The city has become a tapestry of shades, a muted portrait in which humanity persists without pretense or decoration. A breeze lifts across the street, stirring loose ash from the rooftops and scattering it into the air. It drifts lazily, falling in thin curtains that remind you of snowfall, though it is hotter, more tangible, and carried with the scent of charred cedar and stone. The figures around you shift slightly as the air moves over them, hair brushing shoulders, garments catching the wind, yet none startle. Their presence is patient, deliberate, measured, each a quiet testimony to endurance, to the slow, fragile act of being. You find yourself in front of a familiar home, or at least what remains of it. The roof has caved inward, its timbers blackened and brittle, windows are gone, leaving dark voids that resemble empty eyes. A figure steps lightly across the threshold, tracing fingers along the remnants of the frame. You recognize them not by facial features, but by the posture, the subtle tilt of the head, the rhythm of movement. The ash covers them in a soft veil, yet it does not hide their humanity. In fact, it seems to amplify the presence of careful, deliberate life within the ruins. The silence here is remarkable, not harsh or oppressive, but tempered, gentle, almost contemplative. The faint hiss of cooling embers drifts up from a collapsed corner where fire once roared with a consuming intensity. You inhale and feel the heat lingering in the stones beneath your feet, the warmth of a night that has passed into memory. Even the ash carries a trace of that fire. Not dangerous now, only present, subtle, alive in quiet residue. You continue your slow exploration, tracing paths that were familiar once, now foreign. Streets that once carried easy rhythms are fractured, scattered, yet the faint imprint of routine remains. Footprints, faintly visible beneath layers of grey, telling stories of movement, of care, of passage. The figures moving among the ruins navigate them with the same quiet deliberation. There is no rush here, only measured motion, each step a small assertion of life. A child pauses near a pile of wooden debris, brushing a small hand along a charred beam. Their movements are cautious, almost reverent, and you find yourself echoing their pace unconsciously. The ash sticks to skin and clothing, softening contours, masking individuality, yet it does not erase presence. Even obscured, each person remains recognizable through posture, through motion, through the subtleties of quiet endurance. You reach an open space, a square that was once a small market. Tables and carts lie collapsed in soft grey layers. Figures gather there, scattered in small clusters. Their eyes, mostly hidden, do not seek attention, and yet you sense awareness in every tilt of a head, every shift of weight. They move with a gentle rhythm that is familiar and foreign at once, a cadence of survival tempered by exhaustion and attentiveness. You pause in the middle of the square, noticing how the grey covering everything, ground, walls, people, creates an odd equilibrium. The city has been reduced to muted tones, yet it feels intentional, purposeful, ordered in its quiet aftermath. The ash does not frighten, does not oppress, it preserves. It carries the memory of heat, of motion, of all that has passed, allowing the living to step into a softened world where life is present, even when familiar shapes are lost. You walk forward slowly, letting the presence of these grey-covered neighbours guide your attention. Some brush past you without pause, their movements measured and natural. Others remain still, observing what remains with quiet vigilance. The act of recognition is subtle. A tilt of the head, a glance toward a shadow, a footstep matching yours for a brief moment. A language of presence and memory that requires no voice. And as you move among them, you realize that life persists here in ways you cannot fully name. Faces may be hidden beneath ash, expressions erased by dust and heat, but humanity remains, Persistent and patient, it has survived the night, and now it navigates this muted dawn with careful, deliberate attention, teaching you again the quiet strength of being present, even when covered in grey. You wander carefully through the streets, guided by the faint morning light and the hush that has settled over the city. The grey ash beneath your feet softens each step, muffling the sound of movement, and the stillness feels heavier than the heat that passed the night before. Every surface you touch seems to whisper of absence: scorched beams, splintered doors, fragments of walls. Yet even in this stark emptiness, there are pockets of persistence, small relics of life that survived where the fire reached and passed, leaving their stories behind. A teacup lies half buried in dust near a collapsed shop. Its delicate porcelain gleams faintly, almost shyly, catching what little light filters through the haze. You bend to look closer, noting the cracks that do not fully break it, the subtle curve of its handle intact despite the chaos surrounding it. The cup seems absurdly fragile, yet impossibly resilient. In its quiet presence, you sense the weight of the ordinary, the comfort of tea once poured, the careful hands that held it, now vanished but remembered in the surviving object. Further along, the remains of a wooden shoe catch your eye, charred along the edges. Its shape is warped but recognizable, resting against a pile of rubble, like a remnant of someone's journey, paused and abandoned. You reach down to lift it, mindful of the heat still lingering in the air. The sandal is light in your hand, yet it carries gravity. The memory of a foot that once moved through the streets, the rhythm of steps long forgotten, now echoing faintly in your mind. The city feels quieter in its presence, as though the small persistence of objects lends a kind of breathing space amid the ruin. You move slowly, noticing the small, stubborn details that survived the night. A child's toy lies half buried in dust, its paint faded but bright enough to be recognizable. It tilts at an odd angle, resting among ashes like a tiny sentinel of innocence. You pick it up carefully, feeling its smooth, worn surface under your fingertips. The toy is heavy in memory, weighted by imagination and play, by the lives that once moved around it. You set it gently aside, giving it space to exist without forcing it into a story of loss. It is enough simply to notice, to acknowledge its continued presence. The street bends, and a fragment of a wooden table emerges from the rubble. The edges are charred, and yet part of the surface remains unbroken, faintly flat and steady. You run a hand over it, feeling the texture of heat-altered wood beneath your fingers, and wonder who last rested an object there, who last placed something gently on its surface. The memory is invisible, but the object carries its echo. The fire took much, but it did not take these quiet hints of ordinary life, and that resilience, so soft and unobtrusive, is profound. As you continue, you notice a pattern, small, surviving pieces scattered through the destruction. A pair of chopsticks, warped but whole, resting in a corner. A fragment of fabric clinging stubbornly to a post, its colours dulled but discernible. A window pane cracked in several places but still intact, reflecting the muted light with a faint gleam. Each fragment feels like a testament, small statements of defiance against the overwhelming force that passed through the city the night before. They do not shout, do not demand attention. They simply remain. You pause near a collapsed wall, peering into what was once a home. Amid the rubble, a shelf has fallen at an angle, but holds a few items, as if offering silent testimony. A small bowl rests atop, unscathed. A bundle of folded cloth lies neatly beside it. The objects are trivial in size, yet monumental in impact, tangible links to the life that persists, despite the overwhelming destruction. You feel a strange reverence as you move through the space, letting your gaze rest on each item in turn. It is as though these remnants are offering quiet comfort, proof that the world is not entirely undone. Stepping carefully, you encounter a narrow alley, lined with collapsed beams and bricks. Here, the morning light filters through the gaps in soft wavering streaks. At your feet, a piece of paper, partially burned at the edges, flutters in a faint breeze. You pick it up gently, the texture rough and warm beneath your fingers, and feel the imprint of words long faded. You do not try to read them. There is no need. The paper is enough. A whisper of thought, a trace of a moment preserved against obliteration. A few meters away, a fragment of a doorframe stands, leaning against the remnants of a wall. Its paint is blistered, but the form is still resolute. You touch it lightly, noting the strength retained beneath the surface of ruin. It reminds you that resilience often exists quietly. In the parts that remain unremarkable to the hurried eye, life continues in these details, in the soft persistence of objects that the fire overlooked or could not consume fully. You step across a patch of crushed tiles, noticing footprints left behind in the ash, some yours, some others. The prints are ephemeral, shifting slightly under the gentle morning wind, yet they mark the rhythm of human movement in a city that has been fractured and softened by heat. You pause, letting your gaze sweep the street, noting how, even in absence, these subtle signs of life provide guidance, connection, and a sense of continuity. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a faint creaking, a door on weakened hinges moving with the breeze, or perhaps a fragment of wood settling under its own weight. You move toward the sound, drawn less by curiosity than by recognition that the city, in its quietest corners, is still alive. It bends around the small victories that survived the night. Items unbroken, forms preserved, colours faintly lingering, each a subtle reminder that life persists in ways both tangible and delicate. You come upon a small shrine tucked into the ruins of a street corner. Its wooden beams are charred, its roof sagging, yet the small altar within holds a candle holder that has not melted, a tiny statue of Buddha, with its features still discernible. You kneel briefly, acknowledging the fragile grace of survival. The objects here speak not of resistance, but of persistence, the quiet endurance of culture, memory, and care, nestled amid destruction. You rise slowly, letting the weight of the realization settle over your shoulders. Not everything passes, not everything disappears. Continuing along the path, your attention shifts to the textures beneath your feet. Bits of fabric cling to debris, small fragments of metal glint in the pale light, and occasional shards of pottery sparkle faintly as you move. These objects feel weighted with history, as though they carry the impressions of hands that once held them, of daily routines now transformed into memory. You let your fingers brush lightly across one shard, sensing its coolness and the faint echo of warmth from yesterday, the night that passed too quickly. Further down, you spot a child's slipper, partially buried in ash. Its form is small and unassuming, yet its existence carries weight beyond measure. You pause, letting the quiet recognition fill you. The slipper survived because of nothing remarkable, nothing heroic, simply because it endured. You think of all the ordinary routines, the meals, the quiet conversations, the small joys of daily life, and realize that these fragments, surviving in the midst of ruin, hold them all intact. You move on slowly, noticing more. A bent fork, a chipped cup, the handle of a broom, the corner of a rug still visible beneath rubble. Each item carries an invisible story, not of the fire that destroyed so much, but of the quiet, persistent life that once filled the city, and which, against all odds, remains tangible in these small, unassuming remnants. They anchor you to the past, to the familiar rhythms of a world that has been altered but not erased. As you walk through the softened streets, You sense the city exhaling gently, settling into what remains. The fire may have swept through with relentless energy, but these small survivals, objects ordinary, unnoticed, delicate, remain heavier than the devastation around them. They are proof that life, in its quietest forms, endures, and that even amid loss, the soft persistence of what is left can offer both solace and a strange, steady hope. The air carries a weight you can almost touch, thick with the memory of fire and ash, yet tempered by the pale, cautious light of morning. You walk through streets that are quieter now, the echoes of heat and movement softened into a slow, deliberate rhythm. The city seems to breathe slowly, almost reluctantly, as if it is still processing the night that passed, the transformations it has undergone. Every step you take through the rubble-littered avenues is careful, measured, attuned to both the fragility of the ground and the fragile persistence of what remains. You notice figures gathering in small groups, clusters of ash-covered residents speaking in muted tones. Their voices are low, almost reverent, subdued by the enormity of loss and the residual quiet of devastation. You join a group near what remains of a town hall, standing slightly apart at first, sensing the unspoken rhythm of shared presence. Officials move among the people, their uniforms dusted lightly with grey, papers and notebooks in hand. They speak softly, sometimes pausing to write, sometimes murmuring figures that float above your comprehension. Numbers of homes, people and possessions, impossible in scale and abstract in their weight. You listen without expectation of understanding, knowing the count can never fully encompass the lives and details it seeks to summarize. A faint breeze stirs the dust at your feet, lifting thin swirls into the air. You watch them drift slowly, carried lazily between the remnants of walls and charred door frames. Each particle seems to hang for a moment, caught in light before descending again. You follow its motion almost hypnotically, allowing it to anchor you as you take in the hushed deliberations around you. There is no urgency here, only the long, slow unfolding of recognition, the deliberate act of reckoning with what has occurred. The officials move methodically, occasionally glancing at the people, offering faint nods or murmured acknowledgements. Their faces are calm, professional, but even beneath their composed exteriors, you sense the quiet exhaustion that follows nights like this. They count, they record, they try to impose order on a world that has defied it, their low voices punctuated by the occasional click of a pen or the soft rustle of paper. You feel the weight of their efforts in your chest, the human attempt to measure loss when measurement feels almost meaningless. Around you, people shift their attention subtly. Some glance at the officials' records, trying to discern meaning in the numbers. Others stand still, their gaze directed toward what remains of homes, streets and shops, now rendered into ash, warped wood and rubble. You notice how still many of the figures are, almost statuesque in posture, their features muted beneath layers of dust and sweat. The silence between their words is as telling as the murmurs, each pause echoing with contemplation, grief, and the faint persistence of hope. You walk slowly among them, absorbing the texture of the reckoning. A small child clutches the sleeve of a parent, eyes wide but calm, reflecting the muted sky above. The child's presence brings a strange, grounding rhythm to the scene. Life continues, fragile and persistent, even amid abstract numbers and the flattened remnants of a city. You recognize the resilience in these small, almost unnoticed acts. The hand held, the gaze turned attentively toward the adult, the slow, steady footsteps that follow one another across uneven ground. An older woman approaches, her movements deliberate, and kneels to touch the base of a scorched wall. She traces the remnants of carved wood with fingers thickened and softened by age, as though remembering the life it once held. You watch the gesture quietly, sensing the intensity of her connection to things that the fire could not fully consume. In her attention to detail, to the persistence of form and memory, you find a mirror to your own observation. The world may have been altered, but life endures in traces, in recognition, and in care. You notice officials pausing at intervals, raising their heads to observe the scene. They speak to one another in murmured tones, occasionally pointing toward fragments of streets or buildings, marking areas where records must be adjusted. You do not attempt to follow the specifics of their work, only the rhythm, the cadence of slow acknowledgement and measured documentation. Each pause, each turn of a page, seems to carry a weight equal to the space it seeks to quantify, a deliberate act that bridges the abstract and the tangible. Nearby, a man bends to gather fragments of what might have been household items: a bent fork, a broken plate, a charred fragment of fabric. He places them gently on a slab of stone, as if forming a temporary altar, a catalogue of the ordinary preserved amid ruin. You watch quietly, recognizing the care with which he treats these pieces. It is not reverence for the fire or its destruction, but for the continuity of daily life that the objects once embodied. He catalogues them with the meticulous attention of someone determined to preserve the unmeasurable, the lived, felt textures of existence. The air shifts subtly as more residents drift into the area, each moving slowly, cautiously, attentive to debris and the presence of others. A faint murmur rises, low and steady, a background hum to the measured voices of officials. You notice the rhythm, the way it ebbs and flows like the movement of water through a channel. It carries with it no urgency, no plea, only quiet acknowledgement. A communal act of endurance, of naming and noting what is left in the wake of destruction. A soft wind lifts, carrying with it the faint smell of water and soot, blending with the lingering warmth of the morning sun. You inhale slowly, noticing the subtle differences in sensation. The cool brush of air against your face, the rough texture of ash underfoot, the soft weight of dust on clothing. Each detail reinforces the deliberate pace of the day, the long, slow reckoning with loss, a measured reconciliation of past and present, of absence and survival. You move toward a partially collapsed building, its walls warped but holding faint traces of colour beneath the ash. Officials pause nearby, gesturing softly, recording numbers, and sometimes exchanging glances that carry silent acknowledgement of the magnitude of their task. You observe the interplay between the living and the records, between memory and enumeration, noticing how the physical remnants of the city anchor the abstract measures of loss. The two exist together, quietly, a bridge between what was and what remains. A small group huddles near a corner, discussing what has been lost, marking locations where families once lived, streets that once carried easy rhythm. Their voices are low, almost ritualized, careful not to disturb the stillness of the ash-laden morning. You walk past them slowly, listening without seeking to participate, letting the weight of their presence settle into your awareness. The act of observation itself becomes a part of the reckoning, a silent acknowledgement of continuity, a slow communion with survival. As the morning deepens, light shifts across the uneven streets. Shadows lengthen and soften, illuminating fragments of walls, rooftops, and objects that survived the night. You notice each detail with care. The curl of a broken roof tile, the blackened edge of a doorway, the glimmer of an intact teacup on a ledge. These elements, small and unobtrusive, anchor the act of counting to the tactile, lived world, grounding numbers in human experience, memory, and presence. You pause near a street corner, watching officials converse in low voices, their attention fixed, pens scratching slowly across paper. The murmurs of the crowd around you rise and fall like waves, subtle continuous, and almost imperceptible. You sense the enormity of the city, trying to measure itself against the scale of loss, recognizing in each movement, each gesture, the slow, deliberate negotiation with reality. It is a reckoning without closure, measured in breaths, steps, and the faint touch of ash upon skin. Everywhere you look, you see the same delicate persistence. Hands brushing against rubble, bodies moving cautiously, faces turned toward the faintly illuminated horizon. The city counts itself not only in figures and reports, but in the quiet attentiveness of its residents, in the care they take to observe, acknowledge, and persist. You feel yourself absorbed into this rhythm, your own pace slowing to match the patient unfolding of recognition, understanding that the act of witnessing is itself a necessary step in recovery. And as you stand among the ash-coated streets, listening to voices, noting gestures, and observing remnants, you feel the weight of this slow, deliberate reckoning settle in your chest. It is neither sudden nor dramatic, it is measured, intimate, and persistent, a reflection of the city's quiet endurance. The long, slow morning stretches before you, and within it, a fragile sense of continuity, of life moving deliberately amid the ruins, finds its way into your awareness, steadying you as you navigate a world reshaped by fire and memory. The days settle slowly, one into the other, measured not by the sun, but by the lingering scent of burned wood that has seeped into everything. It clings to your hair, to the sleeves of your clothing, and to the fabric of memory itself, so that even in sleep you inhale it without noticing. The city no longer carries the immediate roar of fire. Its heat has receded, leaving warmth and lingering ash in place of flame. But the smoke remains faintly, persistently, a veil over every surface, a quiet companion to movement and thought. You notice it in the corners of your eyes, in the edges of door frames, in the air that brushes your skin with every step. You move through streets reshaped by flame, aware of the subtle textures beneath your feet, warped tiles, softened earth, the faint powdery coating of ash that cushions each careful step. You step slowly, not from fear, but from attentiveness, letting your pace mirror the rhythm of a world that is no longer hurried, no longer easy. Your hands brush over surfaces with deliberate care, the charred wood of a door frame, the faintly resilient fabric of a curtain still hanging in tatters, a ceramic shard that has survived in perfect curvature. Each contact is a negotiation, a soft acknowledgement that the city has changed, yet some fragments remain, enduring quietly, persistently. Every morning, you awaken to the haze that lingers at the edges of the city, soft and grey in the early light. The buildings are muted in tone, each surface covered in the delicate residue of the night's destruction. Yet within this muted palette, you begin to notice the small rhythms of persistence. Doors are opened with a soft creak, revealing rooms where objects survived, or where furniture has settled into new configurations. Windows, though blackened at the edges, still allow light to filter in, creating slivers of warmth across charred floors. You pause in these spaces, letting the quiet absorb you, noticing the traces of life that remain. Meals are quiet affairs, measured in attention and time. You lift the small pieces of food with hands dusted in ash, aware of their warmth, their texture, their fragility. Cups and bowls that survived the fire carry their own stories, and you handle them with care, as though they are reminders of continuity, soft anchors to days before and after the destruction. The air carries the faint scent of smoke, mingled with faint cooking aromas, a layered presence that reminds you of both absence and persistence. You breathe it in deliberately, letting the texture of the day settle in your chest, a slow rhythm of endurance. As you move among other residents, you notice the quiet negotiations occurring in every interaction. Children adjust to the residue on the streets, learning to step carefully over fragments while keeping their small rituals of play intact. Adults exchange gestures that do not need words. A nod toward an ash-covered doorway, a hand extended over a pile of rubble, the subtle sharing of a moment of recognition. These are the small currents that shape daily life now, each interaction a delicate choreography within the larger, smoke-stained city. The ash clings to you, to others, in ways that are intimate and inevitable. You feel it brush your skin, settle in the folds of clothing, settle in hair as fine as silk, until the line between yourself and the city softens. Movement becomes a negotiation with the texture of the environment. Walking over softened rubble, adjusting a coat so that it brushes against charred timbers, turning a small heap of debris to reveal a fragment that survived. In this way, the smoke is not simply a remnant of fire. It is a constant companion, a tactile presence woven into the act of living. You begin to notice time differently now. Days are no longer marked by urgency or strict hours, but by the light shifting across ash-coated walls, by the warmth rising from surfaces long cooled from fire, by the subtle shifts in air that carry the lingering scent of smoke. You learn the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation in tandem with the city, letting each breath align with the quiet cadence of streets, alleys, and open spaces where resilience persists. Even exhaustion becomes gentle, measured by the weight of each inhalation, each movement, each small effort to engage with the world that has been transformed. You move through spaces both familiar and altered. The shops that remain carry a faint, muted commerce, objects rearranged among ashes, items touched gently, preserved by hands attuned to fragility. A small cup is lifted from a shelf, examined and replaced with care. A bundle of cloth is folded once more, then set aside, marking a simple ritual of continuity. You watch and participate in these gestures, recognizing in them the quiet assertion of presence and the gentle negotiation of survival. The smoke itself becomes part of the city's memory. It lingers in corners, collects in hollows, drifts along the edges of streets, shaping perception and movement. You notice it in the light, thin, wavering streaks caught in the glow of morning sun, hovering over tiles, tracing the contours of walls, softening edges. You follow it with your eyes, letting it guide your attention, teaching you the rhythm of the world now. One that is deliberate, cautious, attentive, and patient. There is a subtle intimacy in these days, a communion with the environment that has been altered but not obliterated. You feel the presence of others without needing to speak. Their movements echo yours, each step a recognition of shared adaptation. The ash and smoke that covers everyone does not divide. It unites in the quiet, unspoken understanding that life continues, fragile and deliberate. You move with care, aware of the spaces between people and objects, aware of the softness of movement and the persistence of small gestures. Nightfall carries its own texture, different but equally instructive. The air cools, the ash settles, and the smoke rises into the sky, thin and persistent. You notice its subtle shifts, curling along rooftops, drifting through alleyways, clinging to the remnants of walls and beams. It becomes a companion in the dim light, a tactile memory of heat and movement, a reminder that the day has been negotiated and survived. You breathe it in, feeling it coat your lungs, your throat, your senses, and you recognize that life now carries the scent of endurance as surely as it carries warmth and light. Movement through the city becomes a quiet art, an ongoing dialogue with the past and the present. You reach for objects with care, avoid debris with attention, speak softly or not at all, attuning yourself to rhythm and texture. Every step, every touch, every inhalation of smoky air is a soft negotiation, a slow, deliberate act of living in a world reshaped by flame and memory. The presence of small survivals, the careful gestures of neighbours, the enduring patterns of streets and homes, all form a continuity that is both comforting and fragile. And in this deliberate, patient existence, you begin to feel the slow integration of the fire into your life. The smoke is not merely residue. It is part of the rhythm, part of the texture of your days and nights. You learn to live with it, inhaling it without thought, letting it remind you of what was lost and what persists. Each movement through ash and debris becomes a meditation. Each encounter, a soft negotiation with survival, and the city itself feels almost tangible in its quiet, enduring presence. The day stretches gently forward, carrying the slow lesson of persistence, memory, and the soft negotiation with a world forever altered. The morning is pale and soft, filtered through the thin haze that lingers from nights of heat and ash. You walk slowly, each step deliberate, along streets that once carried the easy rhythm of daily life, now transformed into quiet corridors of grey. The remnants of walls lean gently into themselves. Roofs sag slightly, as though bowing under the weight of absence, and the cracks in pavement hold the delicate residue of memory. You inhale slowly, letting the faint scent of smoke and charred wood fill your chest, and notice how it mingles with something softer. The subtle, persistent traces of home, of routine, of the ordinary before the fire. You move past a familiar corner where a small shop once displayed its wares. The wooden frame has collapsed into itself, splintered and softened by heat, yet traces remain. A shelf leans precariously, dusted in pale grey, holding fragments of porcelain and metal that survived the night. You pause, letting your eyes rest on the objects, feeling the pull of remembrance, not sharp or urgent but gentle, deliberate, like a hand, tracing a familiar path. Memory here is tactile, embedded in the objects that endure, and in their endurance, a quiet story emerges, one of persistence, resilience, and subtle continuity. Further down the street, the air carries the soft hum of movement. Residents navigate the rubble with measured attention, their ash-coated forms gliding almost silently over broken ground. You notice the rhythm of their steps, the careful navigation of debris, the muted gestures of recognition between neighbours. Even when faces are obscured beneath layers of dust, posture and movement convey connection. You sense a slow communal acknowledgement of survival, of living among ruins without demanding the immediacy of action, instead embracing the stillness that surrounds and contains the city. You pause near a home whose roof has partially caved, yet whose walls have retained faint traces of colour beneath charred timbers. A child's toy rests atop a fallen beam, colours dulled but persistent. You reach down, touching its surface lightly, and feel the weight of memory beneath the ash. The object is not a symbol of loss, nor of absence alone. It carries the ordinary life that once inhabited this space, quietly asserting that daily rhythms, however interrupted, still exist in fragments. You breathe gently, letting the small object anchor you to a continuity that survives even when form and function have shifted. The streets wind past other remnants, a teacup cracked but whole, a bent fork, a length of fabric softened by heat but unbroken. Each fragment holds its own quiet authority, an insistence that, even in destruction, the ordinary endures. You notice how your own steps become slower, more measured, attuned to the textures beneath your feet and the fragile forms that persist at eye level. The ash, the charred wood, the soft grey layers over familiar surfaces, all remind you of continuity and impermanence, mingling in ways that are both comforting and mournful. A faint breeze lifts the ash from collapsed rooftops, sending thin curtains of dust into the pale light. You watch it swirl gently, settling softly over objects and the ground alike. The motion is hypnotic in its subtlety, teaching patience, attention, and the quiet art of seeing what remains. You trace the patterns with your gaze, noticing how the remnants of life, objects, walls, traces of daily movement, are unified in their persistence. Even the air feels imbued with history, carrying the echo of routines that once moved through these streets, now softened but not erased. You come upon a place that once felt unmistakably like home. The floor is warped, tiles fractured, yet the outlines of familiar spaces remain. You walk slowly, letting fingers graze surfaces, noting the textures altered by heat and time. The memory of touch is gentle here. The curve of a countertop, the edge of a door frame, the residual warmth of walls, once filled with quiet domesticity. These traces do not demand attention. They exist to be acknowledged, to be held softly in awareness, carrying the continuity of existence that survives catastrophe. Beyond the house, you find a small garden, partially buried under fallen timbers and softened earth. A few leaves remain on a twisted branch, edges curled and blackened, yet clinging to life. The soil is powdery from ash, but holds faint moisture beneath. You kneel, letting hands rest on the earth, feeling its subtle weight, its quiet persistence. The garden, like the objects of daily life around you, is a lesson in endurance. Even when much is lost, the smallest forms of life persist, demanding only recognition, not restoration, as they continue their slow, deliberate presence. Passing through another street, you notice neighbours moving carefully, adjusting to the textures underfoot, to the persistent haze in the air. Children explore the ruins with measured curiosity, hands brushing over the surviving fragments of walls and beams. Adults bend and lift, repositioning objects with care, preserving the traces of everyday life. You walk among them, feeling their rhythm intertwine with your own. The city has become a shared meditation, each action deliberate, each movement a quiet affirmation that life, though transformed, continues. You stop before a low wall that once separated a home from the street. The mortar has crumbled, yet a small fragment of ceramic tile remains, holding its shape and subtle colour. You lean closer, noting the details that survive, the pattern pressed into its surface, the way light catches on its edges, the way dust clings without obscuring. This small object carries weight beyond its size, a delicate memory of structure, order, and care. You inhale slowly, letting recognition settle gently, understanding that even in absence, the tangible traces of ordinary life offer a measure of continuity and rest. The city stretches around you, quiet and patient, ash settling into patterns, objects maintaining forms despite loss, movements slowed but deliberate. You notice how memory lingers in each corner, each surface, each object, not as a sharp recollection, but as a soft, abiding presence. You breathe in the air, heavy with smoke and faint warmth, letting each inhalation carry fragments of what was, what is, and what persists. You allow yourself to move among the ruins without urgency, letting the spaces hold you as much as you hold them in attention. Finally, you pause in an open square that has survived largely intact, though softened by ash and time. The light is pale, diffused through a thin haze, illuminating objects and structures in gentle relief. You stand still, letting the quiet settle around you. The weight of memory presses softly, not to burden, but to guide. You recognize traces of home, of daily routines, of neighbors and neighbors' children, of small acts that defined ordinary life. They are present in fragments, in dust, in light, in warmth, and you let yourself rest in their gentle continuity. You breathe deeply, letting memory settle fully, not to recall sharply, not to reconstruct, but to integrate. The quiet ruins hold the past softly, offering rest, reflection, and presence. You feel the city exhale with you, its ash-covered streets and surviving objects forming a slow, steady rhythm. In this shared stillness, you find a kind of peace, not resolution, not triumph, but quiet acknowledgement, a gentle recognition of life persisting among the softened shadows and fragile structures. You move slowly, deliberately, carrying the weight of remembrance and the comfort of persistence, letting the city and its memory guide each step, each breath, and each quiet moment into the soft unfolding of day. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Rich Davis, and Leslie Schofield. Sleep well.